Thank you all very much for tuning in to today's segment of Mikasa Sukasa. As you all know, it's been a rough couple of days for a lot of different people because of what's been taking place in Syria. Obviously, I don't think that anybody is a stranger to what happened. At least I hope not, because this is something that's very important. And for somebody who's been paying attention to Syria and Iraq and Libya and pretty much everything that's been going on in the Middle East, it's scary to me because we obviously, as if you all have been watching me, I talk about this all the time, we see this ongoing pattern of behavior and aggression from the United States of America, and obviously between with the coalition of Great Britain and France. It seems to always be us who are the aggressors, and then we create refugees because of our actions, and then weirdly enough, we deny the refugees that we create, and then the right tries to make it as if it's the left trying to Islamify the countries, when it's actually the right. A lot of the time, it's the decisions of the right that create these issues. And I'm not saying just the decisions of like Republicans. I mean, even those on the right who live under the, they may live under the moniker or rule under the moniker of Democrat, but they're not actually, moderate or leftist. Most of the ones who claim to be moderates in the Democratic Party in the United States are not actually moderates. They're legitimately on the right. So if you've been paying attention, things have been getting out of hand. They've been taking advantage of us. They've been taking advantage of, our disdain one way or the other for the right and the left. And it's not just in this country. And when they focus on something as I guess effective, or excuse me, it's an effect, not a cause. They focus on an effect like the refugees. It takes focus off of what's causing the refugee crisis. And I always say, if you want to believe that refugees are inherently bad, no. You're seeing, you have to remember, so right now, if I recall, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, Great Britain and France are both under conservative governments right now. And their leaders and their spokespeople are conservative. I think the French, Macron is like, he's a neoliberal, so he might as well be conservative. But my point is that they get so focused on the refugees that they don't want to talk about the fact that our government was what helped put them there. Our actions in Iraq are what helped put them there. And the media, of course, will biasly cover the refugee situation in those respective countries, at least from what we see, because they don't want to talk about the fact that we have refugees in this country. A lot of refugees in this country. We don't even have to talk about the Middle Eastern refugees, because I live in South Florida. Venezuelan refugees are quite common. Like, we have refugees right now. You don't seem to care. Y'all, everybody, like when they talk about the Muslim ban list, right? It became the Muslim ban list because we know what the target was. The target was, there were Muslims because we're worried that there could possibly, potentially be terrorists that come into the country. Now, why would you be worried about that? Maybe because it's our aggression that they could potentially want to retaliate against. You get what I'm saying? Because we have Venezuelan refugees here right now, like I said, walking amongst us, going to school with us. But what's even funnier is that we have a lot of Muslim refugees here right now. But a lot of them don't necessarily live in New York, California, like as in like in large groups. They live in places like Minnesota, Vermont, Wisconsin. They live in places that you would never think to look. They live in places where they do not interact with the average big city, well-educated and well-networked American who's going to start asking, like, what the hell? Well, how did you get here? Well, we had all these problems with our country. Y'all kind of sent your special forces here to screw us up. Like, there's a bunch of Somalian, Ethiopian, Nigerian refugees right now. And if any of you have ever been to the St. Paul's, Minneapolis airport, yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If any of you have lived in Vermont, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Wisconsin, same thing. Like Milwaukee area. Refugees are not new, and we're the ones creating them. And so it's important to control and moderate that narrative, because it's a lie. And there are and the reason I'm saying this, 'cause I'm sure there's some people from the right or the conservative side that are watching this right now who are avidly against what we're doing in Syria. Hell, I saw Mike Cernovich go on a tear about what was going on, which was surprising because he loves Trump. And then he called out his followers on Twitter who critiqued him for having integrity. He did a whole video calling them out on it. Which, like I said, I give credit where credit's due. That was impressive. Tucker Carlson, another one. God knows, in the mainstream, I would say that he's been one of the only voices that were on the right side of this. Weirdly enough, even Tomi Lahren. When Tomi Lahren has more of a conscience and more integrity than Chris Hayes, Rachel Maddow, etc., etc., that's a problem. That means there is something more nefarious going on here. I dare anyone right now who's watching this, do a quick Google search on how many casualties were lost in Syria. When I Googled it, I found at first the literally in the middle of the night, a couple of hundred. Some numbers were as low as 7. Some numbers were as high as 1,000. But at least I could find something. Google it right now. You can't even find a number. Do you understand how ridiculous that is? You can't find a number of casualties. You can't even find what damage was done. And there have even been people who are, I don't know what you want to call them. It's crazy, the people who are just so avidly against Assad and his regime, as in government, the ones that are so avidly against him, have no idea what the hell is going on in Syria at all whatsoever. And these neoliberals found themselves agreeing with Trump, Mattis, Hillary Clinton, all the neoliberals and all the conservatives that they hate. Remember, these are the same neoliberals who believed that Trump was going to start World War III because he was that crazy. And so when he actually was this close to doing it, y'all were cheering him on. There is so much irony in that amount of just unbridled ignorance. We can't have Trump in office because he'll start World War III. Y'all, okay, this is the moment you've been waiting for. All the Democrats, hey, you've been looking for something to legitimately critique Trump on. This is that issue. And they were silent and silent and silent. And after the missiles were launched, after the lives were lost, do you know what they respond with? They respond with, oh, it's a disgrace that the president would launch a missile strike on Syria without congressional approval. What? So let me get this straight. You're not upset at the fact that he launched, screw the approval of Congress. That's like maybe fourth on the list of things that I'm a little worried about. What I'm upset about is the fact that he says that he's going to pull out of Syria. He says, and by the way, if you could share this, retweet this, I would appreciate it, because we're about to actually get into the analysis. But he says he pulls out of Syria, right? They cut off $200 million in funding. And if you know anything about these regime changes, you cut off $200 million in funding, that's damn near like ending the war. Seriously. So right after that, big coincidence, oh God, chemical weapons go off. What a coincidence. Huh? Like, maybe we should investigate this. And they were like, nah, we just gonna bomb them. And everybody like, hold on, wait a minute. Let's take a step back here. Okay. How about we investigate this? I don't know about. And then Assad says, you all can come and investigate. I have absolutely nothing to hide. This was the next day. I have nothing to hide. You all can come investigate. Let's solve this problem without losing lives. And so the solution that they presented right after he said, okay, you can come investigate. What a coincidence. Boom. This launched missile strikes. How does you all can come investigate mean launch missiles at us because we're guilty? I don't speak Arabic that well or at all. And I may not even speak Trump that well, but I definitely don't speak French. But how does you can come and investigate when you'd like. We have absolutely nothing to hide. Mean bomb my capital city because I'm guilty. Now, luckily, with this particular administration, they're so stupid and egotistical and just honestly quite plainly, they're slow. They're not smart. They're not. Oh, the Democrats have one leg up in these type of situations than the Republicans have. They're very deceptive. Understand that even myself, and I had Syrian friends. I lived in at the time I was going to it wasn't dominantly Muslim and Arab school, but it was like heavily populated with Arabs and Muslims and people who are just educated on the issue. I was a comparative politics major, and we studied it, and it still seemed very, very, very convoluted. In a vacuum, it did. And that's partially because that's what the government had intended for it to look like. Because what you do is you say, some people don't like Assad. Some people don't like the rebels. They're both fighting each other, but we just want to fight ISIS. It's like, hold up. When you think about how weird that sounds. Some people don't like Assad. Some people don't like the rebels, but we're there to fight ISIS. Why? Hold up. Why is ISIS there then? Well, because maybe they don't like some of the other rebels, but they really don't like Assad. Or why don't they like Assad? Because he attacked his people, or those people Syrian? Or ISIS Syrian? Or the people in ISIS, were they Syrian? Well, no. Okay, so that's kind of weird. They just rolled up into Syria and said, let's just stay here and hang out. All right, yo, let's go take Assad. And then what exactly? And if you're fighting the Syrian government, and you're fighting the United States government, and you're fighting Russia's government, wouldn't you think that the U.S. would be on the same side as Assad? Well, yeah, you're supposed to think that but like I said, they convoluted it in the beginning of it. They made sure that you were confused so that whenever we got a notification like we received on Friday night, we wouldn't react to it. But we would say, I don't know. I don't know how to feel about it. But think about how at first we were in Syria and Obama claimed time and time again, we're there to attack ISIS. We're there to deal with ISIS. We're there to get ISIS out the region. Because whenever the chemical attack situation, we tried to pin other chemical attacks on him that were not Assad. Multiple times we did that. It didn't work. So you say ISIS, people can kind of get behind you for bombing random places when you say ISIS. But today, I want to explain to you how, I'm trying not to cuss, y'all. I'm trying not to cuss because my mom gets so mad at me when I cuss on my live streams, y'all. But it's BS. Like I said, think of all the things that you couldn't find while you were researching. You still, if you just Google the first 3 pages, you're not going to find any casualties. You can't find them. They're telling you the things that you can't find. Oh, they bombed a few gas plants, and that was a chemical gas plants. That was it. You know, we were very, very precise. We were very precise. Okay, we're going to see. So, after I had to spend literally hours going back and trying to find the information that I had found the night before, I saw something very interesting. Coincidentally enough, ISIS was just perfectly ready and mobilized and rearing to go the moment that the US, Great Britain, and France decided to attack Assad. What a coincidence. Now, I understand why you may not know about this. I understand why you may not have kept up. Because where it was on the internet, or excuse me, it was in American media for all of maybe 30 minutes. I'm not even exaggerating. I went back later on that night in the middle of the night and couldn't find the links again. But the Islamic State attempted to take advantage of the U.S.-led attack on Syria today in order to capture new areas inside the southern districts of Damascus. For those of you who do not know, Damascus is the capital of Syria. However, this offensive would be short-lived as the Syrian Arab army and their Palestinian allies were able to beat back the encroaching terrorists. According to a military source in Damascus, the Islamic State had attempted to catch the Syrian army off guard with the attack. So, once again, off guard, it's really weird. It's almost like you knew that day that it was coming. I mean, ISIS, as far as a military group, is very well trained because, well, the U.S. trained them. So they were overwhelmed. Luckily, the Syrian Arab army is now preparing to launch an offensive in southern Damascus alongside their Palestinian allies. The goal of the southern Damascus offensive is to capture all the areas currently controlled by the Islamic State. Do y'all hear that? Because a lot of people yesterday were like, no, that's not true. I mean, that was a very nice way to put it. People were saying, no, that's not true, because I tweeted about this. And y'all saw the tweet. The tweet, it said that we are the bad guys. Because we are. Because I don't know if you all understand the implications of what that means. That means we coordinated an attack with ISIS against the Syrian government. And for all of my military strategists out there, anybody who is in intel or, anybody who actually is involved in military strategy, what does it look like whenever someone asks for an investigation, you launch an attack, right? You launch an attack. And then at the same time, you launch an attack. Somebody on the ground is also moving towards the government that you're trying to overthrow. To us, that looks like air support, doesn't it? It looks like we were giving air support to a ground offensive for ISIS as they moved in to Damascus to try and get closer to the Syrian government. Granted, we have the ability to prepare pretty quickly for a military assault, but obviously we can't attack the Syrian government out of nowhere, because remember, originally we were in Syria for ISIS. Okay. That is how Obama sold it for a very long time. Now, that's a pretty big news, right? And it's not like it just came out. It was, when was this article written? The 14th? So today's the 15th. Yeah, it came out yesterday. The Islamic State attempted to take advantage of the U.S.-led attack on Syria today in order to capture new areas inside the southern district of Damascus, the place we were bombing. We coordinating a strike with the terrorist group. And some of you may still have some doubts, like, hey, that's way too coincidental, though. I don't know if I can trust that. That's okay, because guess what? I got some more news for you in case you didn't know. While all this was going down, or right before all this was going down, while we were distracted with the news and Trump and Trump's tweets, which, according to mainstream media, are a lot more important than the actual bombs that he threatened to use and eventually did use in the tweets, Israel attacked Iran. I'm not joking. And it wasn't like the day before. It was a few hours before we attacked Syria. I want you all to understand something. Israel bombs Iran. A few hours later, we bombed Syria. About an hour or so after that, according to the initial report, less than an hour or so after we bombed Syria, ISIS moves in on a ground offensive. That's a coordinated strike. If there was ever any definition of a coordinated strike, that is one. They tried to set off World War III yesterday, or the day before yesterday. Luckily, the people, there was such, this is probably the if there was a silver lining in any of this, it was the fact that when that update came, I don't think that they got the reaction that they were expecting. They probably thought it would be something to the degree of, we would ignore it. Like, oh man, that sucks. Whatever, like, what's going on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.? Because that was like the first trending topic. That's what they thought would happen. Or they thought that somehow we would manage to, just talk about Trump and blame Trump, and Trump as being the only one, and it's Trump's fault. He shouldn't have acted without congressional approval, which I think Obama rarely, if ever, used congressional approval with his drone strikes. Let's be clear about that. So the fact that Democrats all of a sudden care about congressional approval before we start bombing areas is hilarious. We bombed a wedding by accident in Syria. It was all over the news, or international news anyway. So the fact that Democrats want to act like you all care now is hilarious. I was kind of expecting that from most people, I'm not gonna lie. But what actually happened was there was this overwhelming pulse of emotional distress from everybody in the world. What actually happened was, for the first time in a long time, the left and the right echoed the exact same sentiments. For the first time in a long time, both the left and the right saw the duopoly for exactly what it is: two halves of the same whole. The left and the right realized that they did not have virtually any control over what happens in this United States government. That night, many of us were ashamed to be American, French, British. We felt powerless, but we also felt empowered. Because everybody, we were all on the same page. And we all knew what had to be done. And everybody just it starts rapidly tweeting about it, educating people on the situation, doing whatever they could to learn as much as they could, possibly learn when it comes to Syria. And it was a reminder to the establishment. It was a reminder to the deep state that we're paying attention and we're not going anywhere. Not until the job is done. It was a reminder that it doesn't matter who you put in office if you're going to continue to take innocent lives abroad with no regard for human life, and in just no just cause. If you're going to continue to work with terrorists and fund terrorists, then we're going to keep talking about it, and we're going to start making steps to hold you accountable. There were protests organized yesterday immediately. There were protests organized today, which I will be attending. But there were so many people that couldn't sleep that night. I was one of them. Because all I want is for those kids to worry about what they're going to wear the next day before school. What they're going to eat when they wake up. I don't want them worried about if they're ever going to wake up again. And there are so many people that swear they understand what's going on with Assad and with the Syrian government. They can critique the rational people from the comforts of their home, their air conditioners. It's always easy to critique when you've never been on the other side of the barrel of the gun. Because I think that many of us people of color can absolutely relate to what's happening overseas. Think about it. It's never anybody else. Nobody's realized that. A couple of my friends have, but nobody's realized that. When you have a history of racist presidents who initiated these policies, who do you think are going to be the victims of the policies? Think about the countries we attack, always primarily Arab, or in Latin countries, or in the Caribbean. Turkey, primarily Arab. We use two nuclear weapons on Japan. After they were, by the way, we're already about to lose. But we used 2 nuclear weapons on Japan. But it was Nazi Germany. Mind you, FDR's policy of total surrender was supposed to be an attack on the people, and it was because of Nazi Germany. To make sure that they never rebuilt to the position that they got to with Hitler, and that they understood how dangerous it was for them to have support somebody like that. But we didn't launch the nukes on Japan. We launched them on Germany. And the excuse was, well, Germany was pretty much already defeated. But they always leave out the fact that Japan was already defeated. The excuse was that we were going to save millions of American soldiers. But they were already defeated. And they call it the Truman Bomb. Right? That's what they called it back then. What you all should know about Truman is that he was a racist. The things that he called Asian people and the things that he called black people, you think that didn't play into his policy crafting? The fact that his #1 advisor and I believe future Secretary of State, Burns, was a South Carolina legislature whose entire focus was making sure that segregation desegregation didn't happen? And you think that didn't play any part into why we bombed Japan instead of bombing the Axis powers in Europe? Because they're not going to bomb somebody that they can relate to and that looks like them. That's too personal. There's too much of a connection there. They want to bomb people that they are distant from, they have no cultural links to, at least they feel like that, that speak differently than they do, that aren't the same religion as they are. But some of you probably think, oh, that's just a coincidence. Oh, but it's not, because we use chemical weapons in Vietnam to the point where the effects are still felt right now. Right now. We didn't even use chemical weapons on Nazis when they were using chemical weapons on American soldiers. That was the whole reason the Geneva Convention, one of the reasons the Geneva Convention happened, was for rules of engagement. But we decided to use them on Vietnam and for fun. In Cambodia as well, for fun. We think, supposedly, that Russia is the worst country ever in life. You know, historically, that's what some of these presidents will have you believe. But they had a great admiration and respect for Stalin. Granted, when Truman and Stalin didn't get along that well, because Truman, like I said, he was a Democrat who was hyper-conservative and racist and hated anything that resembled communism. But my point is, even if they hated Stalin, they respected him. Plus, he looked like they did. Even like in the newspaper, they would write about how Russians looked like us, they worked as hard as us, and they had even a lot of American attitude. So they respected them here. And as much as we lambasted Russia, we never even engaged them really during the Cold War. because we thought we respected them. Yeah, it was the nuclear war was, imminent, but also we thought that they would have the balls to pull the trigger on it. So when we go to World War II. When we finally get to World War II, guess who we go after? We're in Africa protecting Great Britain's colonies. Doing the bidding of Winston Churchill, who's a bloviating racist. He didn't give a damn. He did not care. He literally said that white people were superior. Winston Churchill. So, and who obviously have we worked with time and time again? Great Britain. France has a hyper-conservative element to it as well. Think of countries you can name off the top of your head that you're well aware that the United States has essentially colonized via regime change. A lot of you think of immediately Honduras, which is correct. Venezuela, which is correct. But it goes deeper than that. El Salvador, Mexico, working with Colombia. Do you know who is responsible for extremist Islam? That's us. That's the United States. We created that philosophy in a book factory in Nebraska, so that we can use that to create rebel factions in the Middle East. So these leaders have constantly attacked that the policies are representative of policies that were created by racists who are unapologetic about it. I don't know what's hard to comprehend about that. But they were. What are you going to say? No, being racist doesn't craft your policy. Yeah, I'm sure that's why Jim Crow existed for so long in the South. Because when you get elected to office, all of your subjectivity and your biases disappear once you get elected to office. And you make all of your decisions based off the right thing to do. Come on, people. So, people of color, the situation with us, when it comes to like Syria, Libya, these places, Iraq, for me personally, it hurts even more. Because we get funneled through a system. We get funneled through a system that essentially forces us into the military. And then we get so caught up in the security of the military, our parents or our grandparents because that's how a lot of black people ended up becoming stable, was through the military. Because at least there I can get a steady paycheck. I know I'm going to get a guaranteed raise every year. I know I'm going to get my 3 square meals a day. So they say if you want to go to school, just go to the military, give yourself a better life. Hey, if you want to support your family, go to the military. And they send people of color, poor people of color, to go attack other poor people of color. And make you feel nonchalant about it. Like you're serving your country. The same country who put you in this situation where you can't afford to draft dodge like a Donald Trump. And then hell, if you do become a hero, God, you'd be lucky if anybody heard about it. But Muhammad Ali refers to that reality in when he was going through his situation where he was draft dodging. He said he wasn't going to go and fight other poor people of color. Like, for what? And we thought that we were the good guys. And this entire time, people had no idea that we was helping the apartheid. We were helping the apartheid side in South Africa. And once again, if you have to wonder how these policies affect anybody, you want to see how these policies are exclusively covered or even deemed as important by the general society. How long is we've been in, we know Somalia, Nigeria, the Congo, Libya, Chad, the list goes on, Ethiopia. We've been in these places for so long, and we just chalk it up to Africa's just crazy, man. They're just crazy over there. We know about the apartheid, but nobody cared about the apartheid. It's not that old, people. It's actually fairly recent. The coverage about how black people were treated in Africa didn't matter. The fact that 80% of South African land or farmland, or over 80%, was owned by white European descendants or white Europeans themselves, never made the news. And we're so desensitized to the idea that white people just deserve what they get and we should never observe how they got it. And they always win, by the way, usually. We're so desensitized to that reality that the moment South Africans, or the Afrikaners there, like the white South Africans, started having their land taken back from them, it was international news, people. The world could not believe that Africans were pissed still about something that had happened to them not even a generation ago. Like the apartheid was like damn near at it, like still peaking when I was born. They were still getting their land taken when I was born. So you have people who just had kids or young adults who had their land taken. You know, their parents' land was taken. Their parents vividly remember when they had farmland, or maybe they don't, because maybe they were killed if they didn't leave their farmland. So, and we were, as a world, we were so shocked that white people were facing consequences for the actions that don't get me wrong, I'm all about moving on. I'm firmly about moving on because I understand things in the past happened and we shouldn't blame those in the present for things of the past. The problem is when you ignore the oppressed, when you are the oppressor and you have benefited from oppression, what do you think is going to happen eventually? There's only so long that I'm going to struggle while you get to prosper off of the backs of my generations of my family's labor. But look at how we covered that. It was a big deal. But the things that happen in Africa, how European countries treat Africans at large, largely uncovered. How the U.S. intervenes in African governments regularly. We did it with Chad. We obviously, as you all know, did it with Libya. We're doing it right now in Somalia. Or we don't have to look at Africa. We can look at, once again, Honduras. We can look at Grenada. We can look at Trinidad. We can look at Panama. That never gets covered. But the one time white people who had thought they conquered and made a group of Africans docile, the one time they get retaliated against, it is world news because nobody can believe it. So people of color kind of have, I feel like, a special connection to these issues because we know how we get dehumanized. It's happened to us our entire lives. It still happens to us. It's very recently that Hollywood has started changing that narrative. And so what's happening in Syria is no coincidence. What happened in Iraq is no coincidence. What's happening in Yemen is no coincidence. Look at how much coverage Yemen is getting. If you don't know, they're dark too. We back Israel, obviously for monetary interests and military interests. But look, so we back Israel, right? We obviously pretend like we don't give a shit about Palestine. We haven't given them sovereignty. We had never fought for their sovereignty. Even though they were literally there before Israel got there, or Israel, the sovereign nation, got there, the state. And then, of course, they elevate the Israeli government and the Israeli people. But I can guarantee right now, 95% of you watching this right now or listening to this via podcast right now have never even seen a black Israeli on the news and in the interviews. Think about it, have you? Think about it, for real. Seriously think about that. Have you seen a black Israeli? Have you seen one? You think they don't exist? There are a lot of Ethiopians there. A lot. There are a lot of Yemeni people there. A lot. There are a lot of mixed Israeli Jewish people in Israel. Guess what? They are highly persecuted. The racism there is about as bad, if not worse in some circumstances, as the racism in the States. Well, and all over the world, really. The way Ethiopians and Ethiopian refugees are treated is horrible. And you don't hear about that. Just like you don't hear about what happens in Palestine. And if you've ever seen an interview, if you've ever heard a conversation, if you've ever seen a picture, you would think everybody in Israel, if you're looking from American media's perspective, is white. Hell, if you're looking from the Israeli media's perspective, you would think that everybody there is in Israel is Eastern European, Jewish, Ashkenazi, white bread, cornbread. So if you think about it from that very realistic perspective, because it's not a complex thing as to like why the patterns that we've seen have continued for, the last 70 years. We had Truman, racist, conservative. We had, who was right after Truman? Was it Eisenhower, who wasn't racist, but was a puppet, which is weird for a general, but whatever. He was a puppet to conservatives. We had Nixon, racist, conservative. He was the one, that the comments about the silent majority, that was Nixon. Nixon came up with that, not Donald Trump. And it was everybody knows, like it was, at the time people knew what the fuck that meant. So look, that's Nixon, right? So then at some point we had Jimmy Carter, whatever. But even Jimmy Carter, by the way, he didn't have a blood-free presidency, less blood than others. But even him. So that's already 3. And I think I want to say Eisenhower got 8 years. So Eisenhower got 8 years. Truman had 4 years. That's 12. Nixon had 4 years. That's another 12, that's 16 years. Then, obviously, we had Bill Clinton for 8. And we did during his term. Who else am I forgetting? We had Gerald Ford, who's like moderately racist. Oh, Lyndon B Johnson. If y'all would hear some of the comments from Lyndon B Johnson, you would be terrified at the idea that anyone like him could have been elevated to the presidency of the United States of America. Even close. He should have never been vice president. Oh, George H.W. Bush. Ronald Reagan, who was the biggest puppet in the history of the United States of America. So we had, then the CIA was built by conservatives, for conservatives, and ran by conservatives as well. So was the FBI was kind of half and half until recently. It was just neoliberal, deep state people. So in the entire history of the last 70 years, we had moderately progressive, Jimmy Carter. We could throw the latter years of FDR in there. Kennedy. And I would even throw in Barack Obama. And I don't like Barack Obama right now. But he was a little bit less of a war hawk, than these other people were. And even he messed up because he was continuing their crazy policies. So, listen, once again, Bush, Nixon, Truman, Eisenhower, Gerald Ford, who am I missing? I know I'm missing somebody who was very important, and I can't. Oh, H.W. Oh, I already said H.W. Lyndon B. Johnson, and I'm missing one person. Oh, and Trump. Duh. That's 8 presidents in 70 years, people. Hyper conservative, openly racist, except for maybe 3 or 4, but had racists in their cabinets that weren't shy about it. And you don't think that has any correlation with how we go about crafting our foreign policy? Who we respect and who we don't respect as people? What ethnicities we target and who we don't target? Yeah, the money is also very important. The money is very important. But that's another reason why whenever somebody with money, because it always starts with the money. I think everybody knows that by now. It starts with the money. But then what happens? Somebody with money goes up to a bleeding racist and is like, "Hey, you mind going to bomb those people over there? You know, I think they did something wrong. Maybe, I guess, possibly. Yeah, sure, go ahead." What? You don't think that happens? Look at the person who's in charge. Look at the person in charge of crafting, creating, or pushing a policy or an attitude. Look at their principles and their values. It becomes pretty easy. It becomes pretty easy after that to see, to notice the pattern of behavior. Why do you think it's so easy for Israelis to shrug off Palestine and pretend like they're just not the same people? That's just a micro example. If we're going to acknowledge that, obviously, the duopoly is one thing. If we're going to acknowledge that the oligarchy is in charge, that the United States is not a democracy, if we're going to acknowledge all the similarities in war hawk-ish behavior and other presidencies, then we have to analyze every similarity that we've seen in the past. We can't acknowledge the oligarchy. We can't acknowledge the duopoly. We can't acknowledge corporate influence. We can't say today that the Democratic Party is just as racist because we've heard some of the things that Hillary and Bill Clinton have said and done, and pretend like the Democratic Party of the 40s and the 50s were different somehow. We can't see the same policies being implemented today that were literally exact replicas or continuations of policies in the 40s and 50s and think that racism had no part in it when Truman was openly racist. He said something to the extent of every man, woman, and child, is equal it has equal opportunity and is equally talented. Well, as long as it's not a black person, or as long as it's not a black person, and I won't say the real word that he used, or a chink. Coincidentally enough, what did he do overseas in Asia, and what did he do? Obvious. Oh man, Truman has a long list. Truman went on the rampage, people. Why do you think he chose to drop the bomb on Japan instead of dropping that bomb on Nazi Germany? And he had two. So why not drop one on Japan and drop one on Germany? He shouldn't have dropped either of them, but why not drop one on Japan and one on Germany? Why not? Anybody want to take a stab at it? Anybody want to take a stab at it? Because, what about the lasting remnants for the people of Germany who haven't, maybe they weren't Nazis. Well, we don't know about the effects of this. But do you think they cared about the effects of the weapon, the atomic bomb, on Japanese people? No. They didn't give a damn at all. Because they don't see them as humans. They didn't see them as humans. And they saw, even despite how much they hated the Germans, they respected the Germans. If you look at their offensive, the offensives we mounted, we wanted to stay as far away from Germany and their soldiers as possible. They respected Hitler. They even respected Stalin as a competitor. And then FDR, of course, respected him as an ally. But when it came to Japan, their soldiers, their leadership, they didn't respect them at all. They're like, we'll bomb them. We were scared to engage Nazis. Don't get it twisted, people. But we bombed the hell out of Japan. And that cycle has continued. And it's no coincidence that since then, just think, we never bombed Eastern Europe, never bombed Russia. As much as they want to pretend like they hate Putin, they respect him. So my point is, before I go, I really hope that you take time to do some thorough research on these topics, and this topic specifically with Syria, and start to acknowledge and see the patterns that I see. Because as you all know, I talk about Syria and I talk about Libya and all these places a lot. And you start to see these patterns. And this, once again, is another pattern that we're seeing. A continuation of the policies and the mindsets that were set forth by people in power who should have never been there to begin with. They were puppets. And the people who were crafting the policies weren't likable because of how bad they were as people, so they could never get elected. People knew too much about them. Start doing your research on these issues. And you'll start to find out really quick that when you look at the big picture, three things always. If you talk, cause like I said, looking at the last 70 years or so, because I'm a firm believer that World War II never ended. And if you knew that conversation that Truman, some of you may know of it, the conversation that Truman had with Stalin, or Stalin's ambassador, where he thought that he accused Stalin of breaking the Yalta Conference agreement. And then Stalin never did, that we gave him Poland, or at least half of it, because it bordered his country. They lost millions of people, so we gave it to him. But Truman And all of his arrogance, because he had LDS, little dick syndrome. He used to be called a girl. He was very prideful, egotistical. He was happy that he finally was getting the recognition he deserved. He thought that his first flex was going to be on Joseph Stalin. And so from then on, that was pretty much what ignited the Cold War. Because instead of becoming allies militarily, we became enemies economically and even militarily. And so we started attacking those countries that we thought were quote-unquote communist. Coincidentally enough, not any of the white ones, just, Cuba, Grenada, Trinidad, Panama, Afghanistan, a really weird communist connection with Afghanistan, Iran, because they border Russia. In case you didn't know, that's why we're constantly involved, trying to dethrone Iran, involve ourselves with Iran. These are facts. During the Cold War, we did not attack one white-dominated nation. These are facts. And we tended, every time we installed someone, every time we replaced somebody, they were white. When we replaced them, the person we replaced them with, obviously white, male, right-wing authoritarian, super religious. Tended to wear nice suit and tie as well. And usually Western educated. Every single time. Except for in African nations, obviously, because it's a little bit more difficult. And even, and literally up until the 90s, and late 90s, really, we always used communism as the reason why we did it. I'm not even joking. Into the 90s, it was, we're scared that Russia is going to somehow get to the Bahamas and maybe they'll get a pina colada and turn the entire country racist or communist. So we gotta attack them. We gotta dethrone them. Yeah, that's seriously. So they changed it up and everything became a war on terrorism. Mind you, Germany had the gall in the midst of all this to have free health care, free education, and even give leave for maternity reasons or paternity reasons. Can you believe those commie bastards? And we didn't set a damn foot in Germany. In Great Britain, you have a baby, you can just stay home and take care of it. They'll pay you for it. And they have free health care too. And free education. Those commie bastards. I'm sure that we went right inside of Great Britain. Nah, we didn't. All those countries that supposedly hated healthcare, hated communism. Think about that. All those countries that despise communism just as much as we did, supposedly. All those countries have socialized medicine, socialized education, maternity leave, paternity leave, guaranteed severance. Still managed to maintain mostly a free market. But it wasn't like Germany's been had socialized health care. England has been had socialized health care. But we never stepped foot in any of those countries screaming communism, did we? Interesting. But, and then with Batista, who was white whenever Cuba was dominated by white people, and because of America and their connections. We never invaded them. And guess what? The unpopular knowledge, the unpopular fact that isn't well known by people was that Batista was a communist. The guy who was in charge before Fidel Castro, people. He was a communist. We didn't step foot until Fidel Castro came in. And he was a quote unquote communist too. But all he wanted to do was take that 80% back of Cuban land that America owned illegitimately and give it back to the people. And he even offered them compensation. But the second thing that he wanted to do was desegregate Cuba. And that was a problem because we hadn't even been desegregated yet. We hadn't even been desegregated yet. And then they were going to other countries with the Cuban army because despite popular belief, I know they try to make Cuba look real small on that map. Like they do with Africa, they try to make it look real small. Yeah, Cuba's huge. It is massive. And they had a nice sized army. And they were going to South Africa and in the Caribbean and fighting against us and fighting for the liberation of minorities. So that's when they started having the problems. When their money was affected and when their race was not dominant. But we pretend to care about human rights while Saudi Arabia gets to reign supreme with absolutely no consequence. I hope you enjoyed this segment of Mikasa Sukasa. I had to make it a little bit longer because, like I said, I was really busy yesterday. But do some research on these topics, people. Start checking out some of these patterns that we've seen in history. And more than anything else, always remember, find your balance. Peace.